We're now going to move on to I guess what is the almost the final session of the day. We're going to have a panel discussion. So if I could invite our panelists to return to the hot seats, pick a microphone. It doesn't matter, I don't think, which colour tape you've got around your microphone. Sally obviously gets first choice because she's there first. So we've got Sally North, who is the Acting WorkSafe Commissioner. Dr. Terence Chia is going to rejoin us, Senior Inspector Scientific Officer Human Factors and Ergonomics with WorkSafe. Dave Gossage, Agricultural Safety and Emergency Management Consultant with Preplan, and Tim Manning, Health, Safety, Environment Head with CBH Group. Now, as discussed previously, questions, if you could send them through via Slido, so that gives people online the opportunity to ask questions as well, and also you can vote and select questions. We've got some that we've held over from previous presentations that we'll ask as well, but there are a couple that I'm just going to kick off with to get the conversation going. And the overriding topic of I guess the day is around culture in the workplace. So I'm going to put a question, I suppose, initially to Dave and probably to Tim as well, but around cultures that you're seeing amongst farmers and perhaps especially older generations, and is there a trend in behaviours in older versus younger farmers? And then perhaps how is that different in big business compared to the smaller operators that we've been discussing as well? So I don't know, Dave, do you want to have a first stab at that, and then we'll hand over to Tim?
Yeah, certainly. How do you turn these into? They're on. Okay, there we go. Yeah, interesting. Having the full spectrum, I recently was engaged with a corporation from over east to look into, they hold multiple farms around Australia. And I met with their people here in Perth, managing WA, and they said the biggest issue is they can't get any engagement with the workers on the ground. So, and certainly in a nutshell, there's a huge disconnect between the board in the eastern seaboard and the worker. The board's trying to save money up here, and they've got a worker doing 4 people's jobs on the ground and wonder why he's not doing any paperwork. Okay, and that's the summary of the overview of the outcome of our discussions that went on for quite some weeks in looking at why can't we get our people on the ground to engage. So the analysis out of that was that when you talk to the guys on the ground, we found that the common answer was, I don't have time for this. I'm doing 4 people's jobs. The board over on the eastern seaboard don't give a rat's ass about me. They really don't. They just want to tick the box to say they've complied with the WorkSafe rules so that they look good. And I said, well, that's foolish, because those PCBUs over there are creating a psychosocial hazard. And by having their workers, they wonder also, they didn't work out why they couldn't keep workers. Well, it was pretty friggin' obvious to me. So needless to say, they didn't like the response or outcome that I shared with them. And still to this day, they haven't fixed their culture. And it comes down to culture. So at a corporate level, the culture is one of tick a box, maximise production, maximise profit. Then you go down to the next level of the generational farmer, what we call the old school. And they are a wealth of knowledge. And I love engaging with the dads and the granddads. It is such a warming feeling. They have so much knowledge, but it's not shared necessarily. And they'll have a go at the son because he's not ready to take over because he doesn't know this shit. And I'll say, well, have you actually taught him and showed him this shit that you're talking about? And they say, oh, I suppose not. So it's about taking the older generation culture of they should know that to, have a discussion. And this is what I was saying about culture. Just like we've been doing here today, we've all been engaging and having discussions with each other today. So at the older generation level, they need to be having discussions with their sons and daughters about the future of the farm, but sometimes they don't know how to share that, and it takes a third or independent party to come in and sit with them to break the ice and get them talking. And that's what I've done in a couple of cases, and then things just seem to turn around. And then we get into the what we call the younger generation, the high-tech gizmos, the nerdy situations, and those guys who love technology. But there's a disconnect between technology and the older generation. because a lot of them don't even have an email address. They don't look at the computer. So how do you engage them? So it's about having these conversations, which by having conversations creates a culture of people feeling free to open up and actually talk freely about issues that are in here, which is causing the psycho hazards in the workplace. And then from there, you can build and change your culture within the community. So you've got 3 different tiers that I've picked up over the years about how people behave and how they hear and see and do things. So, Tim, over to you.
Look, I think you covered it really nicely, Dave. Probably the bits that I'll add in that we see, the big shift, I think, in the last few years, and COVID's driven this as well, has been just being mindful of people's mental health. So we support and help fund mental health first aid programs, farm safety initiatives, and the want and need for that has skyrocketed in the last couple of years. And I think that's been a wonderful thing. It's driven a different conversation, and certainly I'm really mindful that people are more comfortable with going and checking in. And it's not necessarily just a younger generation. I think it's people recognising that if you don't innovate and move with the times, you'll quickly get left behind. And as I said, start of my presentation, that we've got some of the most innovative growers and farmers in the country, and that's not just in terms of growing grain, that's in terms of people leadership and the rest. So I think this stuff, it's just another competitive advantage for most of our growers.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question now about the inquiry into agricultural safety. I'll probably address it to Sally in the first instance, and then perhaps get the 2 guys on either end to provide a response. But Sally, do we have a sense as to how the agricultural sector has responded to that inquiry, and I guess the Commissioner's responses to that, and do we have some confidence that it's going to see improvements in safety?
Yeah, it's a big question because I think the industry is very diverse, and as the inquiry itself noted, there's a range of different attitudes in terms of people's willingness to, or just really how they conceptualise workplace safety, and I think we saw that quite well illustrated in the last presentation there. And I think it's a little bit the same in the response. I think there are some parts that are saying, yes, this is something that we've been aware of for a while, and we agree there's some work to do, and are happy to engage with that. And I do think, though, that there's some parts that are a little bit concerned that the government might become involved in their affairs, and they're a little bit worried about that happening. And to those people, I'd say, we reach so many of our stakeholders through information like we're doing today. We're trying to put some information out there. Really, our kind of largest way we reach people is through voluntary compliance, and that is a huge part of what we do. It is the biggest part, much bigger than inspections or prosecutions by a really long shot, and that is our first thing. So we are really asking that you have a look at what's good for you. As Dave said in his presentation earlier, it's about looking at what you can actually take away and what will work in your organisation, and not something that is apart from your operation, but something that's actually integrated so that it actually doesn't take up more time. We think one of the biggest things that ever happened with, I think, safety on the road was seatbelts, and everyone was like, oh my goodness, that's going to be really hard, and everyone will have to put one in their car and they'll have to wear them. The impact on road safety has been enormous, and I don't think we've wasted a lot of time over them. So there's some really good structural things that we can do.
Yeah, look, I go back to Dave's presentation. I think there's been a lot of noise and a lot of misconception, and a lot of sound bites, and really look at sort of what's happened in safety in Western Australia in the ag industry. And for me, the last couple of years, industrial manslaughter piece being kicked around, it's been mind-blowing just how many people fear of being charged sort of with industrial manslaughter, and don't quite understand that the bar to clear for that sort of charge is really, really difficult to achieve. And so I think the piece that I always reflect on is go and understand how it applies to you, and once you have that conversation, it really is driven for the right reasons. I think you look at those numbers of people dying, 12 in a year is entirely unacceptable as an industry. But, it shouldn't be lost on us that probably 20 years ago, the number would have been double that. So that is that continuous journey. There is no destination, and hopefully, in the future we'll be talking about near misses as being, sort of that same number, but is entirely unacceptable. So.
And certainly the question is actually one that is generally how most discussions start, that this is just bureaucrats in the city making more legislation to justify their existence. Well, it wouldn't have happened if people was doing the right thing, is what I say. So the challenge for us is turn that negative of, this is going to affect my productivity, I've got to waste more money, and turning that negative feel that's out there into a positive about, well, if you have a look at this, and everything I keep coming back to, what's taught me is culture. You change your attitude and culture, you'll embrace the need to keep each other safe and the family safe. And then as a consequence of that, your productivity is actually going to go up, because people are wanting to work harder for you because they feel a part of the business, part of the farm, and not just a worker, and if you don't perform, we'll just sack you and get somebody else, like I've heard from a number of farmers, and they just chew through people and wonder why they at best can keep people for 3 months. It's because of their culture and their attitude to their staff. And I say to the guys, you're losing people because of your attitude. You're the boss. Your attitude is actually having a real negative effect down through the chain. So until you change that, you're going to have this churning wheel of people every 3 months. And he said, well, how can I fix it? I said, well, let's have a discussion about you and your attitude and your culture that you are breeding to others. And that's where we start the discussion.
Thanks. I'm going to throw in a quick question that's come in via Slido, because it is related to the inquiry, and I think that Sally might be able to answer it reasonably quickly. And Terence may be able to chime in regards to how we categorise injuries. But when completing the inquiry into the ag industry, were suicides on farms included in the statistics as workplace fatalities?
So they weren't in those 12. Those 12 were what we call acute or traumatic workplace fatalities. And generally in workplace statistics, most commonly we don't include suicides, largely because they're just very complex to categorise, not because we don't take them seriously or because we're not interested in work-related psychosocial hazards that may have contributed, but it is very complex to categorise in a situation like a suicide.
Yes, so there is an ongoing research project that WorkSafe is working with ECU as well. We're looking at how the regulator can better approach work-related suicides, because, as Sally said, the cause of suicide is complex and can be attributed to a variety of reasons. So, again, in terms of categorizing, it's not very simple to do that.
Thanks, Terence. This has been voted up fairly significantly, so I'm going to ask this one next. Is there a best practice audit template we can use that links to the new legislation and what we should have in place? If not, can WorkSafe implement this initiative? And I suspect we may have covered off some of that with some of the presentations, but I'll provide the opportunity. Go for it, Sally.
I would advocate, and it's slightly biased, but as Holly did recommend as well, the farm safety checklist is a good place to start, and that link is available in the Slido now and should be working. I was getting under maintenance earlier in the day. So that is a nice place to start, and then we will be having some further guidance with a little bit more detail coming pretty soon as well. So that's what's come out from the WorkSafe point of view. And while it doesn't go through, reg this and reg that and so forth, it is prioritised, it is aligned with the regs. So that's where I would recommend.
Thank you, Sally. I'm going to throw one to you, Terence. Should psychosocial hazards be managed separate to the main safety system?
Mine safety system?
The main safety system.
The main
safety
system.
Safety management
okay,
system.
Thank you. Sorry. Yep.
Apologies for my diction.
Yep, in my personal opinion, I think psychosocial hazards need to be integrated to the hazards in the workplace, because behavior drives action. So they say culture, it can be management driving the culture. In terms of work, it can be the workers driving their own culture, because cultures can appear and exist at different levels. So if you separate the hazards, you are signaling to the workplace to say that, hey, physical hazards is separate from your behavior, and that's not really going to work.
Can I just supplement that one? Particularly for larger organisations where you might get reported psychosocial hazards that might involve the behaviour of individuals or kind of sensitive issues, you can de-identify it but still have it in that register. So you say, look, the hazards workplace behaviour, we're not going to say that person A and B aren't getting on or having issues or whatever, but, that you manage the hazard in that way, but you don't have to have all the names in there. So.
Yep, and I just want to add to that, Sally, because there is a difference. I came from a HR background as well. There's a difference between HR investigation and WHS investigation. So HR is mostly about substantiating an allegation or not. There's penalties attributed to it, dismissal, so on and so forth. People are being identified. And that does not need to be the case for WHS investigations, because the purpose of WHS investigations is to look at, what are the risks, what are the controls that were in place, that were not in place, what can we do in the future to prevent this from happening. And the WHS team can get the incident report with all the personal details struck off and do the investigation. So in organizations that have understanding the difference between a HR and a WHS investigation, they can sort of have better outcomes in terms of their approach for work health and safety.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to ask another question around psychosocial issues, and I'm going to throw it to either Sally or Terence, whoever would like to answer this one. But will WorkSafe get involved or provide assistance with a psychosocial incident if there's no lost time or compensation claim?
It's been a very interesting time in terms of psychosocial hazards, probably in the last 12 months or so, and certainly since we've had regulations on this, and whether it is a state of everyone being more open to talk about these things, whether it's the regulations and the codes of practice, whether it's the new Act, I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, we have a lot of work coming in this space at the moment, and we will be and are kind of triaging that based on seriousness. We take all of it as information. We provide information to people on it. We're not able to investigate all of the reported matters, so we have to assess them case by case, and we do that and we get back to the people case by case. But open to Terence to add on to that if needed.
Yep. So in terms of the question, I would like to address the question. Just because an incident does not have lost time injury or any other tangible injuries does not mean that it's not a psychosocial hazard injury. So just bear that in mind. Yeah.
Terrific, thank you. One I'm going to throw to you, Tim, because it's specifically for you. What interface or advocacy does CBH have with the infrastructure owners, such as main roads and local government associations, to keep your people safe?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think we genuinely view ourselves as part of regional Western Australia and part of those communities. And so I think we recognise, just by our sheer size, that we play a role for advocating for regional Western Australia. So we have, very regular conversations, whether it be with main roads, PTA, ARC infrastructure, around conditions, and also where we sort of see hotspots, problem areas. I think the other piece is that there's a lot of other advocacy groups, whether it be sort of grower representative groups, other sort of ag safety representative groups, and where it makes sense, we try and tie on with them and make sure that those priorities are aligned. And again, we're advocating for money, sort of, and resources into the right space. So I'd say quite heavily where it's appropriate.
Great, thank you. One for you, Dave. You talked about diary notes in your presentation this morning. We've got a question that's been in Slido since that time. Is it true that diary notes are not being held in such high regard because people could just go back and add crucial information with a pen after the fact?
A very interesting one, that, and having been in court and questioned on those very issues and a coronial inquiry as well, if it's notes made at the time, they are admissible. And yes, to prove otherwise, it's up to the person making the allegation to prove that those notes weren't made at the time. So it's a really challenging one, and one that you would need to seek advice of a lawyer. But certainly from my experiences, because I'm always, everything I do all day, every day, I make notes of everything. So, and I've been in front of coronial inquiries and in court many times, and those notes save you. I don't care what anyone says. I've even been complimented on the detail of my notes in some cases. So to say that they're not worth doing is a falsehood, because It's what I did at that time with that person. And it's up to others to prove otherwise. But if the other person hasn't done the same thing, well, that's their problem, not yours. But you've done the right thing, okay? So it's about leading by example, and hopefully by everyone seeing me taking my notes, that's going to have a flow-on effect to other people to do the same thing. So I will strongly recommend to everybody to take notes. The question about what's admissible and not is up to the courts, not me. But if you have nothing, you have no defence to say or validation that you did do something that you said you did. So like with everything about documenting everything is if you document it, you have a record that you've actually done something. So I cannot reinforce strongly enough that you should be taking notes, especially if you're dealing with a worker who's not doing the right thing and you've told them time and time again not to do something. You could have told that person 20 times and then they, chop off a leg or something, and then the inquiry comes in and the investigation says, well, what did you do about this? Well, I've told him 20 times. Well, show me the evidence where. If there's nothing documented, it didn't happen, I'm sorry. It just didn't happen.
Thank you. Sally, one for you. Besides the media release, will WorkSafe provide more detailed findings on the quad bike investigation? And I'm assuming they're talking about the recent incident.
Yeah, at some stage. So while it's under investigation, unlikely. But when that has concluded, then it's likely that we would, yes.
Thank you. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so if you've got any questions, get them in. That's including those people who are watching online. We've still got a few more to move through. This really could be for anybody, and I'm probably going to make some comments as well myself after that. But learning by example or copying is very effective. Can we identify safe operators and provide learning opportunities to understand it in practice?
I'm happy to have a crack at that one first. So I think the answer is yes. And so I always reflect on, your safe operators are usually, sort of your efficient operators. Productivity and safety absolutely go hand in hand. And so, those people, usually good leaders, know who they are, even if they haven't quite figured out exactly why. They'll know that they're the best people. And so what we absolutely see and what we try and do when we bring on a couple of thousand people every harvest is take those people who are, one, good at doing, but also good at coaching, and pairing them up with people who, for us, there'll be often, sort of majority of our workforce, it is their first job. They'll come out of Perth and have absolutely no practical hands-on experience, and we're heavily reliant on people who know what they're doing and can coach really well and, sort of will watch like hawks to go and lead in that space.
Great, thank you. I'm going to make a few shameless plugs. I mentioned the awards previously, so I don't think WorkSafe would ever endorse or say you should look at these people and do this, but I would suggest that the awards and the finalists are probably a good place to look if you wanted to see some models of those businesses that are doing a good job with safety, because if they're prepared to put themselves forward for an award, they probably think they're doing a good job, but I'm sure that they are. The other good source of those businesses that perhaps are doing a very good job, on our website you will find something called the WorkSafe Plan. So it's an audit tool which is for all the business, but I know a lot of agricultural businesses have used it previously, and we actually publish those businesses that have achieved a certificate achievement of certain levels. So you'll see like businesses on there, and I don't suppose they would mind you reaching out to them to ask, how do you do what you do and can we learn from you? So there's a couple of sources that perhaps you could use, finding businesses that are doing a good job and are taking safety seriously.
And certainly, workplace behaviours which leads to safety and productivity is a learned skill. And if you've got multiple employees in your own business and you've got somebody that is a natural leader, buddy them up for a day or two with each other, just to jump in the ute and do the day's work with them. And that's how you share, mentor, train good habits into people, is by putting with grounded people that are calm and, got great life skills. Just because somebody doesn't have a piece of paper doesn't mean they're not smart. I've worked alongside, and I will go to war with some people that haven't got one certificate in their life, but for their life skills are tremendously amazing is the only word to say. And I would work side by side with that sort of person. You need to get a whole spectrum of cultures in your workplace. And certainly don't overlook the older people, please, because there's such a wealth of knowledge in the older generation that's literally dying out. And we haven't captured that. And it's so disheartening to me when I see that, and especially when I sit down with the older folk who have retired. And there's such a wealth of knowledge there, this huge encyclopedia that's not getting passed down. Capitalise on it. Bring them in for a day or two and just get them to work, just be a passenger in a ute with one of your workers and let that conversation start. And having that conversation will actually enshrine some just wonderful knowledge that you can't put a price on it, really.
I just want to quickly add on to that. In terms of in-house mentoring or sort of leadership development, so in terms of studies, research has shown that, don't just pair people up and just go. It's also important to explain to the person being picked on why they're picked and the expectation of them as a mentor or leader, because there have been studies to show that by just pairing up, the natural leader can end up hating it because they didn't want that responsibility. And so you're in a way creating another hazard in itself. And then turns out that the pairing process might actually turn ugly because I don't want anyone shadowing me. I'm good at what I'm doing. So I think it's quite rare, but just bear in mind, formalize it and sort of clarify. So it's going back to that communication piece I'm talking about, just clarify. And at the same time, if you do that, you're validating that person's, the good stuff.
Thank you. Now, I've just received a note to say that we've got time's up and we do have a couple of questions left. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to look over the corner, I'm going to say that we're going to commit to perhaps put answers to those questions in the WorkSafe Farm Safety newsletter, perhaps. Might be a good place for it to put those. So can I please thank our panel and invite them to retake their seats, and we'll have some closing comments.